You're listening to the Label Machine series, a podcast to inspire and help indie record labels and artists to build income streams for their music. I'm Nick Sadler, a music entrepreneur that has helped start and run multiple indie record labels. In this series, I'll be speaking with music industry leaders about their experience and the lessons they learned on how they both market and grow their music income. Welcome to the Label Machine series, where we discuss with successful industry professionals how artists and record labels market and sell music. My name is Nick Sadler, and today's guest is Alex Branson. Alex has spent many years in record companies, including Sony Music, The Lost Generation, in music and media records. Past work included creating a startup inside Warner Music Group, levelmusic.com, and building up the Ingrooves distribution business from the ground up, which is a fantastic company, and I still distribute one of my record labels through them. Amongst other things, he's also head of business development at Rotor. He also does business development at Empire and Beatport, as well as running his own music podcast, ABC Music Talk Podcast. Alex, how are you today?
My life just flashed before my eyes there. Thank you for the quick potted history.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I know at the beginning, you know, I was just sort of going to look at your recent work, and I wasn't aware of sort of how many hats you wore as well. And I guess, to be honest, that sort of probably just leads straight into what sort of my first question, which I sort of just rewrote just before we started after discovering sort of all the hats you wear, is you do work across so many different roles, and it makes me realize these days how many people in the music industry do work across many roles. Do you think this is a growing trend?
Oh goodness, yeah. Well, okay, so I more by accident than anything else for me, at least. I'm quite envious of people that can apply for very specific, say, marketing roles that you see advertised, and actually, you know, be the right person for that. Because I know that I look at most job ads and I'm like, I'm not the right person for any of these things. So no, I mean, I'm definitely sort of, you know, a bit of a Swiss Army knife, you know, not the sharpest tool in the box, but you'll find a use for me eventually. And it has come from this kind of sort of, you know, slightly eclectic career. But yeah, so do I think it's a trend? I think people are having to understand a lot more about lots of different roles for certain. But I think there's still a lot of room for experts in this industry, and I hope they do continue to be so.
So, do you think you've always been a Swiss Army knife? You know, earlier we were talking about, you know, you were a bassist and you were sort of the guy who was sort of organizing the press shoots and things like that. You know, just going back to sort of how you got into the music industry, was it always that way?
I was just always interested in everything. And I actually, weirdly, when I was in the band, thought I might become a music publisher, because I had just learned what a music publisher was. And I thought, that's really interesting. And, you know, I'm the sort of person that, and this is pre-internet because I'm very old, it's horrible. You know, I went and found, you know, some information about, you know, sort of legal minimum splits of publishing, you know, between the publisher and the songwriter, and just learning about these things. That was all. I was a bit nerdy, I suppose, really, and just was really interested in everything that was going on. And I think that probably that natural curiosity led me to, you know, pick up skills, learn things as I went along. Also, and lots of credit to some of the people that helped me in my early career, and it's part of the reason why I do the podcast and the way that I do it. They allowed me to do lots of different things. So, you know, when I was at Sony in the 90s, Lynn Cosgrave, Carl Cox's manager, you know, she just trusted me to run a Josh Wink campaign. I'd never run a campaign before. Fan of Josh Wink, sure. You know, and this sort of carried on. And then she was like, oh, well, do you want to do the licensing for a Gatecrasher album? I was like, what is licensing? But yes, you know, and I think, you know, you do need these people that do just sort of trust you in you know, in your career development, to allow you to either figure out the bit that you are really good at, and therefore you learn that that's the thing that I want to then go on and do. Or as in my case, it just meant that I continued with this sort of fascination with this industry called the music industry, and just sort of carried on. I mean, there are things that I've never really done a lot of, like the live side, other than being in a band myself. But I think maybe that's just, you know, I probably haven't gone to as many gigs as other people have that might have been stagehands and progressed up to producing the shows. But certainly, I think it's mostly been on the recorded side of the business, you know, and so that's typically where I've stayed. I forgot what the question was. What was the question? Yeah.
Oh, I think it was just, do you think it's a growing trend for well, sorry, I was just asking about your background, actually.
Right.
And you alluded you worked at Sony as well. I mean, I guess how did I'm actually very interested. How did Ingrooves come about?
Well, so Ingrooves, so just a slight correction. I built the ex-North American business from the ground up. I started
Gotcha.
that in my bedroom, and with Rob McDaniels, who's now the CEO over at Beatport, but the founder of Ingrooves. He and I built this global business, and later got bought by Universal. And that came about because I had got, by complete chance, involved with digital distribution before it was called digital distribution. I was working at a record company called Media Records. I was doing this thing called licensing, which kind of covered many different sins. And then when the sort of earliest DSPs came around, that these agreements would appear at the company, and they looked like licensing contracts. So they were just given to me. And what I then realized is that it wasn't just as simple as looking through the agreement and working out whether it's something we wanted to do or not as a business. We then also had to do the supply of the audio and the artwork and the metadata. And again, this is perhaps slightly unnecessary because it's an irrelevance now, but none of that stuff at record companies was organized. I mean, metadata, that was label copy. We used to call it label copy because it was the stuff that went on the back of the vinyl records. It wasn't anything to do with, a database anywhere. And it was all in Word documents. So you then had to convert that into Excel spreadsheets. Yes, Nick, I'm very old. It's horribly.
No, not the age.
Nick
I
just looked at me and went, "What? Bits of paper?" Yes, no, that's right. And actually, that's true. So at this particular record company, we had all of our audio masters on DATs in boxes that also contained a printout of the label copy, and that was the storage. That was our, that was
your database.
That was our database. And we actually had, there's a chap, unfortunately passed away, but he knew every catalog number, because that's how we stored things, by catalog number. He could tell you the release, what remixes were done. He knew the entire, and this is a large catalog. He knew everything from the catalog number. And it's like,
wow.
It was the most impressive thing. People used to just shout across the office. His name was Rich. He was like, "Hey, Rich, which box is this in?" type of thing. And he was, "Oh, that one there." Just knew it. It was really, really impressive. Anyway, databases now exist, and so we can all do it. But again, can't remember where I was going with this. But
it was the setup of digital distribution.
Yeah. So that got me into that world, and it was at a time when there wasn't really digital supply chain businesses. They were just sort of starting to come about, and certainly a lot of record companies didn't have any agreements with the DSPs, as we call them now, or the digital retailers. This is obviously all downloads, pre-streaming, really. And so the trade body AIM had started to realize that their members, they represent record companies typically, didn't know what they were doing or needed some help, we just say. And so they put together a couple of committees, the New Media Committee, the Business Affairs Committee, and then you had kind of the board that would sign off on stuff. And so I left this record company having met these people that were doing this sort of very early kind of foray into trying to help technology companies interact with the music industry. That was what we're talking about here, because the two were not natural bedfellows. The music industry weren't technologists for the most part. I mean, not every record company or every person at a record company would have had a computer back when I was doing it, because they don't need it. And this was all just really technology evolving, I suppose, around us. But so what I was doing at the trade body was the very first collective negotiations for record companies in the UK. We now call this, and Jeremy would hate me for making the comparison, but this is kind of what Merlin does now, right? But we were doing it from a slightly different angle, where we were just putting together sort of template agreements. So the record company still had to sign up directly to the DSP. And as a consequence, they then had to maintain the relationship ongoing, which was the asset supply, so the metadata, the artwork, and the audio, and also the marketing relationships. So it wasn't aggregation in that sort of way. But of course, over in the States, this wasn't really happening so much. And you had companies like The Orchard, Iota, as was, and Ingrooves, and they were the kind of the three big companies that were looking at this. And during this period of time when I was at the record company and the trade body, I had my own company. I had a label management company born out of the record company that I had. And because I started to work with this company called Rotor, which was a consultancy firm to the trade body, and they built the technology, so that was their bit of it. I just kind of got involved in that world, and I had my own aggregation as part of my label management company that was using the technology of this, and so that was kind of where all that happened. And over time, that company Rotor, that got bought by an American telecommunications linked company, because they thought they could do something clever with the media assets over the copper wires that they had as their network, and so built this other business called Broad Street Digital. It went through a few name changes before we got to that point, and then that eventually got sold to Royalty Share, so which then got bought by the Orchard. Every company gets bought by somebody, it seems, or at least ones that I get involved with do. And I essentially was just consulting for Royalty Share at the time, helping the handover. I knew it was coming to an end. And a mutual friend of mine, who I now again work with, a guy called PJ Dooley, brilliant guy, one of the sort of the early minds in this space as well. He knew this guy called Rob McDaniels, and Rob was trying to figure out how he could take his San Francisco-based company onto the global stage. Didn't have anyone outside of North America, San Francisco, and Rob and I met up and honestly hit it off immediately. And he just sort of said, kind of give it a go, see what you can do. And I already had got this kind of large set of relationships with UK-based record companies. So all I did is I just went out and spoke to all the people that I already knew and said, hey, we've got this cool company. They've got some really, really good tech. And that was always Ingrooves' thing. It was really good technology. Why Universal got involved? I mean, at Ingrooves, we handled Universal's North American digital supply chain for decades. It's like that. That's how that relationship kind of came around. So that was really kind of how I found my way into that, and of course over time built it up. I opened offices all around the world, and had a great old time with it. And it was by far, I would say, the most fun I've had in the music industry. And I think that's quite interesting, because I have worked directly with artists and all the kind of glamorous stuff, but this was just it was the birth of digital distribution, and it was so exciting.
Yeah, so that must have been early 2000s, mid 2000s.
Well, so that was, I was early 2002. I think I really kind of got involved with digital distribution. And this is all pre-DDEX and things that we take for granted now, by the way, in which I was partly involved with, helping them perform that. And yes, so Ingrooves was 2008.
Yeah. So I think when I started the label, it was 2009, and I do think it was a really exciting time because as well as what was happening on the back end and what you were working on, there was YouTube had just started blowing up, UKF had just started, the whole music channels being born out of just having someone curate music on a YouTube channel, and I think it was a really exciting time. It still is an exciting time. It still is.
It still is. I've kind of moved slightly away from my digital distribution roots, because it became honestly really easy to do, and everybody has a distribution business. I just interviewed a guy called Andy Irvine from Direct Distribution. He's now built a company so that you can have your own distribution company, not your own record label, your own distribution company. It's like it's become that easy to kind of build the tech. But the tech didn't exist. The first metadata sets we were working off had 5 fields. They were essentially ID3 tags. And that has got more complex and more involved. And it's still a big old job. You got to maintain multiple relationships across the globe. With all these DSPs and all those technical data feeds. But of course, there are companies like Fuga in the world where they just sort of go, well, it's all right, we'll take care of it for you now. So it's changed. It's not, I don't think it's as innovative and as interesting anymore. I've kind of done that. So that's kind of where I've moved on to.
You're like me. It's like, it's all about the new. And once something's established, it's like, what's the next thing?
Well, exactly. Why not, right?
Yeah.
And I think that again, that comes back to that curious mind that we've mentioned before. And I'm well read in blockchain and cryptocurrencies and NFTs, and I've written a few blog posts and that's something I'm very interested in because it is a potential, new way of doing things,
Mm.
and I'm quite just quite
I,
curious.
I'm I'm all about that. We'll have to discuss
Yeah, for
afterwards the whole
sure.
NFT thing. Um, so, through you've worked at some of these huge companies before, whether either directly within them or indirectly, and I'm sure you've worked with some pretty successful artists. You mentioned Josh Wink before. What was the one artist you're most proud of, and the project that you were kind of part of?
Uh, One of my fondest memories from back in the day was working with Satoshi Tommy. I just, I was a bit of a fan anyway, and so to get to work with him at an early stage in my career, and meeting the Def Mix crew, Judy Weinstein, and working with some really, really legendary people very early on, having a great old time in Ibiza, getting sort of
Mm.
like VIPs to club nights and things like as a young sort of early 20, well, coming out my teens, I guess, into early 20s, that was just a hell of a time. I'd say more recently, though, something I'm really proud of that I've just done with Empire is working with an Indonesian superstar called Afghan, who's a soul singer. In Indonesia, I've seen him fill a stadium on his own. He's just huge. So just millions of followers on Instagram, and does really really well in the music space. And we've just done a record with Empire. It's his first full English album. And this was something that I'd wanted to do for a long time, working with Asian artists in general and trying to help them cross into other markets, to the West, because
Mm.
they were just really struggling to do it because there's language, there's just access, and but of course the internet has changed a lot of this. You can now have these, and we've seen it with K-pop and lots of other things. I'm not the first person to have thought of doing it, and so we did that first record. We had a former Korean star and from Hong Kong, Jackson Wang, and that opened up new markets for Afghan in Asia, and that was a great sort of moment. But then we've just had Robin Thicke, do a remix of one of his records, and that started to open up the American side of things. And so that project it's just a really good way of, again, I think there's a sort of a natural curiosity that I have about, is this sort of thing possible?
Mm.
And yes, it didn't go number one in the States and in the UK, and that would have obviously been a fantastic moment. But it's the very beginnings of taking this artist who is already a huge star in his home country into new markets. And I'm that's something I've been very interested in for a long time. And I think a bit of a byproduct of some of the work that I did at Ingrooves, where we had people on the ground that understood the local market, that would make connections,
Mm.
with things. I suppose the other artist I'd like to mention also is working with Adam Lambert. He was an absolute scholar and a gent, and a lot of fun to be around, and a true talent. And that was something I did a couple of years ago now. But that was awesome. That was a great experience.
When going back to the artist Afghan, you mentioned language and access. Why they're struggling. Which one do you think it is? Do you think it's, my gut is like, is it an access thing? Is it they're just a connection, so they don't know the right people? Like, what do you think is that biggest barrier for the
Well,
crossover?
I mean, some of the stuff that you do with the label machine, this is those skills of taking a record to market. If you appreciate that, the Indonesia in particular, is one I know very well. A lot of my good friends now are the people that run the industry. I mean, and I mean that in the sense that it's just not very big.
Mm.
And this is in part because they didn't really have a recorded music business for so long because of piracy. So
Mm.
they didn't concentrate on that. And so a lot of the Indonesian stars, yes, they'll do a record, but that's not really the bit. It's the live side of things. It's the brand endorsements. It's the doing things on the TV or whatever. It's like their industry, their bit where the money comes from. It comes from. It's much more
It doesn't come from
skewed.
recorded music.
It doesn't come from the
Right.
sale of recorded music, and that has started to change. And so, if you appreciate that when that wasn't there before, it's kind of like it's a lot harder to take that celebrity concept and export that, whereas the music can travel much better.
Mm.
And so that's been a big change for them. YouTube's driven a lot of that just because ad funded, free access. You've got a population of 264 million people, but so many of those, in fact, the large majority of them are very poor by Western standards, and therefore have limited access. But again, those things are changing. One of the things that I always talk about is the fascination that when I realized that there's such a large secondhand market for smartphones, and I saw them go through the feature phone evolution. 'Cause I've been going in and out of the country for so many years, watching that sort of evolution of technology and then also connectivity. And that was something that if you think about countries like Indonesia, they skipped broadband pretty much. It's not that broadband doesn't exist, of course it does, but in the sort of more provincial parts where the mass populace is, the first bit of connectivity they got, because there wasn't telephone lines, right? So you couldn't run, no one had a telephone, but then mobile phones came in because they could put masts. In fact, I worked with somebody whose grandfather was one of the sort of early pioneers around putting mobile phone masts in place. And, so they skipped it. So of course, this movement to digital music consumption, they were already really sort of set up for it, beforehand, if you like. And so, it's been a slower process. So it's technology, it's connectivity, then also having the requisite skill set to then take that record to market in the internet age. And if you weren't really focused on recorded music before as the thing that you were really, promoting, as opposed to celebrity, it's just a different way of looking at it. So yeah. So
just sticking on the the Asia territory as well, and you say it's changing. Is there a growing, I guess, middle class that can afford to say, buy merch or have a Spotify Pro subscription account, where they pay for it? Like, is that growing year on year, or is it something static? Like what?
It's definitely growing. There are some odd things about that country in particular. You will never find an official Apple store in the country. Apple aren't allowed to have actual shops there. So just in the most basic sense of buying that handset, they have premium resellers, right? So there's a sort of a bit of a loophole there. So you see the premium resellers, but there's very heavy taxation. The devices are much more expensive. And actually, if you've got enough money to have one of these things in the first place, you don't buy it from Indonesia. You get on a plane, you go to Singapore, and you buy it from there. And it's
so you're talking about the device that will actually play, have the Spotify downloaded and play it.
Exactly, like the beginning stages of it. And this is why, companies like Samsung have done so well, and of course, therefore the Android platform. So there's just it's a different market. It's a very different market to the West. And so, like in America, like Empire, for example, over indexes on Apple Music, in part because of the music genre, that sort of Beats by Dre, therefore hip hop kind of thing. But also the dominance of Apple in America as a handset, which then of course it's just easier to have Apple Music, right? Because it's there when you get the phone, and they've obviously seeded their way into that. But it just isn't true for the rest of the world, not in the slightest. And it's why companies like Tencent, Chinese company, do so well. In fact, the biggest streaming service in Indonesia is Jukes, which is owned by Tencent. Right, it's just that it's a very, very different market, and unless you know that stuff, it's really hard to kind of navigate.
Is the audience there becoming more open to Western music? So I guess where I'm going for this is I believe that, like, if you're talking about taking someone from Asia and bringing it to Western, I'm sort of talking about what about people in Western music that want to go that way? Because is it growing? Like, is
it for sure? And one of the most sort of popular ways of experiencing music in somewhere like Indonesia is to go to a karaoke place. And just anecdotally on that, one thing, because I've spent a lot of time doing that, because that's just how the people like to spend their evenings, right? So a lot of business meetings or just hanging out with friends, would be, in one of those types of venues. And I'm always fascinated by the fact that, whether it's Oasis or Blur or some other band from my past, the songs that they like to sing to aren't the songs that were the hits in the UK, right? And it's because it's the B-sides, it's the more ballady stuff, because in Indonesia, pop music typically is fairly sort of, we would call it quite vanilla. It's love songs. It's it's falling in love or breaking up, right? That's pretty much what every song is about, right? And so I think that's had an impact on how people have enjoyed music from the West, and they're just not always the big records that went to radio in the UK. They're often the B-sides. They're the ones that are slightly less, catchy or catchy is probably the wrong word, but more like they're less gritty. They're less sort of divisive, and right. So there's just lots of kind of nuances about countries like Indonesia, and of course they're all different. They all have, there are sometimes some similarities, but So
you mentioned ballads, like so for people are listening and they do want to kind of take their music to say, and let's break it up into two rough groups. You've got Asia, you've got China mainland. What would you say are the top three genres that people are growing and listening to out there? Talking about like pop rock, like indie rock, EDM, and maybe hip hop, like across those. Are those growing? Or?
Well, EDM's always travelled quite well into other countries because of the lack of lyrics generally. So it's quite accessible, right? And the idea of a club is now a fairly sort of common form.
Okay.
I think though that you've got to get past a little bit of your Western understanding of things. So, for example, one of the most popular forms of music in Indonesia is something called dangdut, and dangdut is fairly high energy. They actually have a sort of an EDM version of it, but it's music for the masses. It's what, if you go to the villages, that's what they listen to. That's what they like, and it's completely alien to what we would listen to in the West. We just would never listen to it. There are kind of some Western things, I guess, a little bit like it, but it's it's music for the people, of the people. So it depends on what you're trying to do. I've been doing some work with Zing out in Vietnam, for example, and we're really trying to work out how can we make our music perform better on what is the biggest local service there. And unfortunately, what's the biggest sort of music there is local music. They don't care about
Right.
these artists, from even some of the biggest artists in the world, just don't do as well as the local celebrities. But of course they don't, right? Of course they don't. In the same way that only the odd sort of Scandi folk singer will make it through in the UK because we've got our own stuff. We're interested in our own celebrity, right? And it's the same the world over. So, but you can find your way in.
I guess not wanting to put. I guess then, not saying you want to try and push it on, like, hey, there's a huge audience there, so like let's get involved. But I mean, yeah, you're saying for the music for the people, maybe not so much. But is there a growing interest in Western music?
There is, yeah. So that
it is worth going.
It is absolutely changing. Yeah. So I did some work with an artist. She's just been signed to Warner now, a hip hop artist. And when I first met her, hip hop was still in Indonesia quite a sort of underground type of music. There was definitely a scene, but it was nowhere near what it is in the UK or in the States. And but the fact that she can even have a career is what's changing. She wouldn't have been able to do that before. Ramen Girl is the artist. If you want to look her up. But it's now there is enough people there now that have gone, oh, right, there's all this kind of new sounds that we've not really heard before. And the internet is absolutely helping spread that message, and YouTube in particular has done a fantastic job, I think, in a lot of these types of countries where
YouTube, do they use Facebook and Instagram much there?
Facebook, yes. Yeah, they do. There are, in many of these countries, local services that are more popular. Mainland China, of course, with the way that the internet works out there, you really need to be sort of on a WeChat rather than a WhatsApp. It's like it's just kind of how it is. So yes, there are local services.
I guess I'm just trying to think about how you can like the method I have of like creating interest and getting people interested in your music and growing your audience. Is doing the paid advertising using those platforms.
Yeah.
Do you think that can work? By the sounds of it, if YouTube's big, it sounds like you'd be wanting to run YouTube-based advertising campaigns out there.
For sure.
Okay.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And there's plenty of places where you can get the statistics from from the different countries for the different platforms. But you're absolutely right that the idea of running a sort of a global paid ad campaign, no, you've got to really understand what people are actually using locally in the country for sure. Yeah. And it might change over, of course, age demographic or maybe genre of music, and therefore the type of person that might engage with that type of platform. So yeah, no,
Can work, but just test.
exactly. And again, it depends on what your goals are.
So we've talked, I guess, moving back to music in the West. I know through Rotor, you work with more up and coming artists. I'm sure you work with up and coming artists across all your different companies. I guess in the last few years, what are some of the challenges you've seen for artists trying to break into the music industry today?
Okay, I have a good one for you because you'll like this. There's a statistical thing about this. I worked with an artist who was formerly known as Emily Middlemas. She was an X Factor finalist, and as a consequence, went on the tour that they do after the show, and again, as a consequence, had quite a large following. But she also was a child back then, and she grew up, and so she wanted to change her image and how she presented herself to the rest of the world. And I guess one of the sort of big takeaways from the campaign that I worked on with her was it came at a time where she wanted to change her stage name. Now, that has such an impact on everything that you've got up until that point, right? I mean, social handles, but the biggest one for us was the Spotify artist profile, and that really messed up that campaign and I think everybody involved in that probably underestimated how much, because of course, if you're following Emily Middlemas, you aren't getting notified about her new stage name is Illy. You're not getting notified about the new music. And so it was a real ground up trying to create this artist out of nowhere, right? I mean, yes, you had access because you had some social channels, but then they got changed and we saw a massive drop off when we changed that name over because we ported them over. They're like, who's Illy? That doesn't mean anything to me because they'd fallen in love with her through the experience of watching X Factor. And so, you have to be so conscious about those sorts of things, but it really messed up the algorithms. It's like new artists, it didn't mean anything to Spotify in the way that all works. So we missed out on playlists, we missed out on a whole bunch of stuff, and it was kind of heartbreaking to watch because actually I think that the sort of the image that she created around herself, and she looked better, she felt better, she sounded better, and this was musically a change in what she was doing. It was more grown up, a bit more edgy than what she'd done before. So she'd done it for all the right reasons of being an artist and wanting that expression of herself. And it was a fantastic EP that we did together, but unfortunately it didn't land.
How did she have a big email list when she was?
Well, this is the other thing. She didn't because she wasn't in control of that. It was all Psycho and all the rest of it.
Because that's why because my next question was what would have you done differently? Like, how would have you, now you've gone through experience, to make that more of a success? And, and answering my own question, I guess I was thinking when you just said they don't have an email list, I was like, yeah, because if you had all those, she wasn't in control of it, all on Facebook, Instagram and everything, and Spotify. Whereas if all those audiences, she also had their email addresses, she would just email and go, hey guys, I am now going to be changing my thing and going on this new journey. Who's with me?
So to her credit, that we did spot that as a flaw, and she has been trying to build that up, ever since. And she's getting better at it. The emails look better. They're better organized. But she's now on her own, right? I mean, this is the thing. It's like she went from having this whole big sort of, Psycho, which is the label, around her and people doing stuff for her. And then she didn't, right? And in part, she wanted to, go it alone and do it herself. And it's not to say she doesn't have good people around her, but it was a very different experience for her, I think, than what she had done previously. And the name change really, unfortunately, because of the way those algorithms work, it just really messed up the result. Like, great campaign, but underestimated that. So yeah, it was a bit of a shame. But she, she's a fighter and she's doing some great stuff now and continuing on, and it's great to see her flourish. And she's a great songwriter, so she's now writing for some really big acts and having really big success elsewhere. It's great to see.
Oh, awesome. It's Illy, is it?
Illy, yes.
ILL.
Just Illi.
ILI. Oh, go check it out.
Yeah.
So my audience of listeners, they're setting up music companies themselves, record labels. Being that you have built up some pretty incredible music companies in the past, what would be some advice you would give to your younger self that some other music entrepreneurs would benefit the most from, that being that they're at the beginning of their journey?
Okay, so I think one of the things that I've realized in my older self, and it's really manifested in what my podcast is I didn't fully appreciate at the time the amount of information I'd got from other people. And I hope at least that I'm a relatively good listener. And certainly a lot of the anecdotal stories that I was being told back then about how to, get through a particular issue, or just something to look out for, or just a great experience, or something to think about as how you, evolve a particular project. Though listening to all of that input, was something I probably should have really, I suppose, just paid more attention to, because that collective knowledge, I still use a lot of it now. Like, I still think back to, oh, that's right, that happened then, so let's not do that now because that doesn't work, or whatever it might be. So I, as we've mentioned before, I'm curious by nature, but listen to other people. And I always say that to people on my podcast is, listen to all of that information and choose the bits that you think are right, and put it all back together again, and then do the things that you want to do in the future. Other career advice, I, more luck than judgment, progressed very quickly to running businesses. I don't know that that's anything other than I moved around a lot, and it can be hazardous on your CV, right? People distrust that person that comes and goes. It was never very purposeful. I mean, it just sort of happened. I just saw an opportunity and went for it, really. But I moved around a lot, and as a consequence, you just learn so much more. And that's not to say that, and maybe for different people it works differently, right? And I'm slightly envious every now and again when I think about it. Probably overthink it. The people that go into, say, a major record company at the bottom and stay with it for 20 years or whatever, right?
I know. I think about it.
And I've singled out the major record companies there. And of course, there are many other companies that you could do that with now. And that's admirable. It really is. And, and I think that creates a very different type of music executive, personally. Like, I know that, because I recently was at Warner, and I built Level, as you mentioned in your intro, which is their DIY distribution business. And it's a very alien place for someone like me now. I'm not really very used. I mean, I was lucky because really I was like, kind of like the startup guy, right? I was sort of walked in there and was creating this business from scratch. I mean, literally naming it onwards. Great support from the people at Warner. Really think very highly of a lot of them there. And as a consequence, I wasn't so sucked into some of the sort of very structured, departmental, but I came into contact with it. So I sort of was able to sort of view it almost from the outside, looking to see kind of the structure that was in place. That's not somewhere where I would ever exist very well, I don't think. Like, and the people that do well there are very happy doing that job, that very specific job.
I think you're almost talking about the different types of people.
Yes.
Yeah, there's some people that just suit, like, follow the path.
Yeah.
Neither of them, they're like right or wrong or better 100%, or worse.
Definitely not right or wrong.
Or worse.
Yeah,
it's just some people prefer,
sure.
I'm in the lane, I just focus on that.
Yeah.
And other people are like, I need to be across many things.
Yeah.
And that's where that's where you work well. And I'm like you, I'm more like across many things.
Yeah.
So I guess, going back some of that advice, what I kind of picked up from that then is, learn as much as you can, either off the people you're working with and your experiences, and or be curious and just try and learn and absorb, and then take in what's going to work for me.
Well, yeah, and also don't be dismissive of new ideas. That's something that I think has held the music industry back. And it's a horrible cliche, but there's that sort of idea of the typically older white male record executive that is in charge of a music company. that is saying no to things. And of course, as we've discussed, I lived through the very early digital adoption by the consumer. We just call it that.
Mm.
And it was sort of railed against by certain people that I came across in the music industry. And I can't tell you the amount of times that I was at Meeting with labels, explaining to them that streaming was a better way for the music fan to discover music, and they just wouldn't have it at all. And it was, I guess, in part fear of they didn't understand it. They were somebody who'd grown up buying, vinyl records, cassettes, CDs, whatever, and that was music. That was how it was delivered. And the idea of just listening to a track was already kind of from the download age, something that they'd felt very, anti, because it had broken apart the container that had all of the tracks on. Now, that one track that was, you'd got the expensive songwriters in to help the artist do a really good, catchy, hit radio record, you could just buy that song. You didn't have to buy the album. Whereas they've built their businesses based on the idea that if you want that song, you've either got to buy a very expensive single CD, or you get better value, better bang for your buck by buying the album. But of course, it was still more money, right? See, the basket value. So, that whole change that went on, and it was held back by people that didn't want to see that change happen.
But not just an executive level. I remember I was in the States, and we were going between gigs at one of the EDM festivals, and actually I won't say the artist's name, but it was pretty high profile, and we were discussing Spotify and streaming was becoming more popular, and he was just so against it. And there were so many artists in the early days that didn't like it. And I was just thinking while you're saying that, I was like, well, why didn't they like it? And it was a money thing. They were like, I'm not going to earn as much money, so I don't think it's great. And they were like, I'm not supporting it. I'm not sending people to Spotify. And I was like, look, you should get in now, because it is definitely the future. Like, the more if you can grow Spotify now, it's going to pay dividends in the future. And they were like, we had a bit of an argument about it, and I was thinking, well, we'll see how things turn out. And of course, it's where it's gone is with the streaming. So yeah, I think it was not just exec level. It was across the industry. People just, not wanting to get on board with that.
Yeah, for sure.
We talked about challenges. I'm just going to have a quick look at time. Goodness me. How long have we been recording this one?
42 minutes.
Okay, I'm going to skip that question. I'm going to get onto kind of selling music questions, because I know you're going to have some great insight on here. So record sales, or streaming sales, where are you finding royalties are coming from across the major platforms, from Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Tidal? Where are you seeing? Yeah, what's the breakdown? Where are you seeing much of that coming from?
Yeah, it depends on the record company. Empire, for example, does very well in the jail system in America, for example. And we, as a company,
you mean jails as in
prisons? Yeah. So in America, it's business, and you can make a decent amount of money from that. So that's a sort of like a nuanced bit, I suppose, about Empire. But no, look, Empire is, these days, it puts out very commercially acceptable music, as much as it has the sort of harder or less, more niche, sort of, styles. But it's all the usual suspects for a Western-based company, right? It is your YouTube, it is your Spotify and your Apple, and then it starts to fall away, and you get into sort of Deezer and Tidal and some of the others. But again, certain records do better on other platforms. Deezer's massive in France, right? So if you exactly, yeah. Well, this is it, and that's why my former career of digital distribution and aggregation was so important, because you didn't necessarily know where it was going to work. I mean, we at Empire, we just had an interesting thing recently where a African artist that we're working with called Kiddy got picked up by a Bollywood star on TikTok, and so all of a sudden we're like, he's now massive in India. How did that happen? So we, not the UK, not the US, like, it's like nothing to do with any of those countries. So now we've got to figure out his African story and his Indian story. I mean, other things as well. But and it was suddenly, of course, like the biggest platform there is Savin. So, I'm now going, right, okay, now I got to really focus on this DSP that
What's it called? Savn.
Savn, SAAVN,
Right.
GeoSavn, JIOSA. Yeah, it's the biggest platform there. But it's because it deals with all the local music and the local repertoire. And of course, in India, that's what they like listening to, right? It's just what they like listening to. It's okay. Like, they're different, it's fine. But it has meant that this African artist has crossed into that sort of that focus, because not by accident, but by accident, this local celebrity has picked up his record. And of course, TikTok has done that for so many records, older records as much as newer stuff as well.
I guess staying on TikTok, have you, everyone's talking about getting discovered on TikTok. Do you think that is, like you said, accidentally? Do you think that's something that can be engineered, or do you think it's just chance? Like, so if we're talking to just all artists out there, like, just make sure you're available on TikTok. What's your kind of experience on that? Is it just be on there and roll the dice, or can you engineer
it? You can definitely have impact. Engineer it. We try.
It's maybe too early days to really be able to make a call on that?
Yeah, I think a little bit. I mean, we always employ influencer strategies on our bigger records, right? You have to, whether it's Instagram or TikTok or whatever, right? So you're being very purposeful about the targeting, but we've also,
that's really interesting. So just sticking on there, influencer campaign. So what would you define a bigger record?
Oh, well, at Empire, it's kind of defined by whether or not we're probably spending money on it. That's a bit of a sort of a definition. The company's almost split in two. We have our almost like legacy distribution business, and we still do that for both companies and individuals themselves. But certainly Empire is evolving as it goes along, and Ghazi, who owns it, has always wanted to be more on the sort of being a record label than it was a distribution company. So I guess it's a good story as to how he ended up there, but I won't go into it now. I've covered it, I think, on my podcast, so go and listen to it there. So the
where were we?
Yes.
I was asking about what defines a big record. So you were saying, you're going to spend money on it.
Yeah.
So you're going to spend money. So let's say you got $50,000 budget. We're like, okay, cool. We're going to push this record. We've got $50,000, and you're saying influencer is really important. So how are you going? What are the actual steps to go through there? Do you use particular platforms? I think there's one called Whale to reach out to the influencers. Can you just kind of talk through that process a little bit?
And there's lots of these companies, and we're always trying new ones all the time. And sometimes they have exclusive relationships with certain influencers, so they are literally the only way of getting to them. There's a great company called Tagger Media that it's kind of like a social list.
Tagger,
Tagger, then media.com.
Tagger Media, yeah.
And they have this great service where it's social listening. So they're constantly listening to what's going on out there on the internet, and they distill all of that down into inquirable metrics. So you can, say you're a brand and you want to get into a particular tribe on the internet, you can use then music influencers or other influencers to take your brand into it. And they have this like really like simple stuff where they can put on a screen all of the most popular posts in one go, and you can see what type of posts do particularly well for that particular influencer, and then you can actually make your content fit for that. I mean, it's quite simple really, but what they will then do is help connect you with that influencer. So you can kind of dial into what's going to be the most effective type of person to support you. Now, in what Empire does, a lot of the time we already know these people or their particular channels. We also have a few of them as well, some of the secret sauce there. But they were built up organically, and we've just brought them under our wing, type of thing, I suppose. But it means that we can continually talk to an audience in a way that's not sell. And you really, I think the secret there is to just be part of the culture. It's more important to understand what's important to the audience and try, the amount of money the company spends on just making documentaries of stuff that we think people will be interested in. Yeah, it's going to probably promote the artist or a particular genre or, particular neighborhood or something. But it's all part of that, right? And so, Ghazi's always been brilliant at seeing past the kind of straight ROI on, putting a record out. And like, if we do that, then how much are we going to get back? He sees past all of that. He's much more about being fully integrated as an individual, as a company, into the different scenes that we inhabit as a business. And I mean that, that's an advert for Empire at this point, I suppose. But sometimes gets lost, should we say, with some of the other companies.
Yeah. What was when you talk about, so that was really almost sort of answering what I was going to ask with the Tagger Media is, how, if you are using one of these influencer platforms, what kind of content are like, is it up for them to make the content, or do you make the content for them, or you do direct them? So for someone who's like, I want to get into this, right? And I go to, I think Wales, one of them, or one of these companies, and I'm going through and I'm trying to figure out which influencer I should be connecting to, and how does that work? Like, and what sort of, do you create the content for them? Like,
no, typically that the influencer will create the content. It might be that we've created gift boxes, goodie bag type of things that we send to them so they can do unboxings of like a new release, and we've got some kind of interesting bits that we'll make just for them, in the box. There's all sorts of ideas that you can do.
All right. So if you've got an album coming out, you've got like the vinyl, the CD, a T-shirt, some stickers. Yeah. Put it in a box. Get them to unbox it.
That's right. Yeah. And it's quite visual at that, obviously, because we're talking about a very visual media for the most part. Yeah. But things like dances that you ask them to choreograph a dance. That's why they get paid, so that they can choreograph the dance and put that out into the world. And then obviously the hope is that their particular dance is the one that then gets picked up and then people replicate, right? Because that's the change in what's happening on TikTok in particular, right? That's the difference.
So you can engineer the opportunities, whether or not they take off is another thing.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
And what are some, like, just for the metrics for the listeners, like what are some numbers and budgets that you're looking at? If I've got hey, this influencer on TikTok is going to get 10,000 views on this, on average on videos, if you do her song, like how much is that costing these days?
Yeah, you're definitely straying into an area of the business that I'm not as au fait with. Right. The like Empire, for example, has a dedicated team that does this type of stuff. But yeah, we typically would run an entire campaign, I don't know, maybe like 10 grand, right? As a sort of baseline, right? That's a sort of like entry level type of campaign. But that would include some mixing, mastering as much, the production side of things as much as the ad spend. But yeah, I mean, I've been involved with campaigns that are as little as a couple of grand.
Is that for just one influencer?
Oh, no. Oh,
no. So I was actually just very specific. If you're not sure what
I couldn't tell you, but what I can tell you is it will be different and you will always be able to find somebody to fit your budget. Whether or not they're going to have the right impact is neither here nor there. And actually, a lot of the time, these influencers, they can be connected to members of your team in some way, and so you end up getting favors done, or something, or maybe they do, 5 for the price of 3, right? Right. So there is actually no hard and fast rule to this. You do just negotiate. You negotiate, and that's one of the things that Tagger Media helps with. So it's
people are talking a lot about this influence, and it's something I've like looked into a little bit, but I'm not sure at the moment. I feel like it's in the domain of like Nike and Coca-Cola with big budgets going to these big influencers that have got millions of players.
Definitely not.
Is the independent musician out there that's got, I've got $200. Can I use that influencer, and am I going to get some results?
Yeah, $200. You're probably only going to get like one influencer to do something for you.
Which is why you say it's on the bigger records.
Yeah, it just it's like any paid advertising, right? You need to have more than that one moment, but you just do. You need to have that sort of repetition of message. No, so because it might be that you get the influencer, but then you boost the post that they do. Right?
Yeah, I see.
These things have got they all work in tandem, but no, unfortunately it's a business that's become a little commoditized. I mean, look, you might find in your network or extended network that there are people that might just get behind it, right? And so therefore you've got free influencers. So they're just people doing stuff. It's just that it's quite commoditized now. So if you want to buy it, you can buy it. You just contact their agent or the agency that's going to run the campaign for you. They will have all the relationships already. They can tell you immediately how much something's going to cost, what will fit. If your budget doesn't cope, they'll suggest something else. Or if you've got more than they think you can spend right now, then great, okay, cool. I don't need to spend it on that. I can do something else. Yeah, no, it's
interesting. Blogs, are they still relevant?
Look, yeah, good question. I think they are. I think that I think less so. Right? There's other ways of discovering music en masse. I think though that if you are a real music fan, yeah, you're still reading them. You're still of that ilk of I want a magazine. It's just print doesn't exist as much as it used to. Yeah, and look, SoundCloud, has helped keep the blogosphere alive from a music point of view, because you can embed that audio, right? And so yeah, at blogs, yeah, no, they still have a place for sure.
Okay,
they still have a place.
Moving on to social media, we've talked about TikTok as a growing thing, and for your most recent experience in the last 6 to 9 months, where do you find which channels do you find are flying at the moment for music and for the artists you work with?
It's Instagram. Yeah, that in particular is where a lot of people will focus their time and energy. Instagram. I think it's just got the right balance of that audio visual format in the snippet, sort of function, I suppose, that works really well. And then TikTok. That they're the two that a company like Empire will spend probably the most amount of time in terms of social networks on targeting, focusing on, spending money on, etc. And then I know that our head of digital marketing favors YouTube for digital ads.
Oh, right. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. No, he just thinks, he really rates it. It's really good.
We were talking earlier about paid advertising on your podcast.
Yeah.
But now with the focus on you, what you've touched that you're using the paid advertising for the influencer. Where else do you guys spend your money, and where do you find paid advertising works best and get the best results?
So, we will try and do, and COVID's not made this easy. We will try and do some in real life things. So whether that's, and then we shoot content at it, right? And then that content forms part of the output that then is boosted as a paid ad later on. So we try to get past just the kind of the basics of having the artwork up in an interesting visualizer. We do try and just communicate, I suppose, more about who the artist is, that they are, and try and show other sides to them. That's why Empire again. Sorry, this is so much about Empire, but
what company was that? Empire.
Empire, yeah, artists like Snoop Dogg and Iggy Azalea and Robin Thicke, and it's one of the biggest music companies in the world now. It's a Ghazi, who owns it, has done a fantastic job of building a literal empire.
Wow.
Yeah. So sorry. Yes. What were we talking about there, Nick? Why can't I remember what we were talking about?
The question was, we're talking about what works with paid advertising. You were saying, so filming stuff. So I guess an extension on that question then, is that just sort of filming a music video and then filming the behind the scenes, or what are some sort of different things you're doing?
It'll be like listening parties, like get-togethers for artists with fans. Anything that we can kind of film where the artist shows who they are. So again, the documentary side of things, I think, has been a sort of growing interest at the company. I mean, and Empire does sort of kind of funny skits, like there's one where they take artists back to the local corner shop, and they give them a small amount of money. It's like, what would you buy, right? And it's just that and these artists then tell stories about, oh, I remember this sweet from when I was a kid, and this is what I would always, get this bag of crisps or whatever. And these were the cheap ones. I could afford these when I was, before I was famous type of thing. So those sorts of things are really, really engaging. Of course,
Storytelling.
Storytelling. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it fills out more about the artist than, just the music that you hear. Because the music normally has lyrics that mean something, right? Normally. Not always, but but normally, and so it's like, where does that come from? Like, that's of interest to me as the audience. I'm engaged with that because I relate to that, but I would then be, as a music fan, want to know more, and so that's why it's more important to have more than just the album cover as the visual that's out there. We need the artist, in the world, being a human being and being, that stage persona perhaps in real life.
And so what would you, because you mentioning something out of Snoop Dogg and you're doing these documentaries, obviously bigger budgets, but what about for the, the smaller independent record label solo artists that they're signing in these smaller budgets? If they wanted to then create these, these visual video type things, have you got any ideas on how you could do it on a smaller scale?
Yeah, there's an artist called Younger One that we work with that has built this incredible, career out of making interesting short videos himself. He does these kind of they're like little stunts really. So they're short and they've got his music on and it's him doing something funny or whatever, and it just travels and it helps the music travel. So if you've got an iPhone or other phones are also available. But these days, that technology is much cheaper than it ever used to be, right? I mean, it just is. And so nothing's really stopping you. And I realize I say this as a slightly privileged individual, but nothing's really stopping you from creating that content on a low budget and then just being smart, perhaps work with the label machine to understand how to be smart about how you take that content and make it travel.
I think where a lot of artists struggle and what I've seen is, how do you create something that isn't awkward and genuine? Because, they'll go, oh, well, I'll film myself, like in the kitchen, maybe, like,
right.
And, you say, well, what are your interests? And I think that's a major stumbling block at the beginning. If someone's a natural entertainer,
sure,
they're going to get past that. But, that's a third of people. What about the other 2/3? They know they've got to create this visual content. How can they be non-awkward and genuine?
I mean, I can tell you that with the work that I did with Rotor, we saw a lot of, during COVID, lockdown videos because people were trapped at home. So they had to be more inventive. And what I think Rotor as a platform found a very natural fit where they could take bits of video of them in their garden or on their driveway or just in their local neighborhood, against the brick wall, little bits of video of them, looking away from the camera or maybe a performance piece or, on their bike, just riding through the neighborhood or whatever it might be that is something that is there. But then they interpolate that with a lot of the stock library imagery from Rotor that fits with that. Right. And so that's where Rotor does very well because of course then it auto syncs to the music. You don't need to be a video editor to create a cool asset, right? You can just use these tools that are out there. I mean, Rotor's very clever because it will listen to the audio, the music, and it will then make sure that the transitions happen, on the beat, if you like. It's a very simple way of describing what it does. And of course, there are all these different sort of stylistic themes that you run against your video by just clicking a button and choosing it. And so you can get these incredible video assets that don't look awkward because they are just a second of the artist here and here and here in amongst some professionally shot drone footage or street scenes from New York or whatever it might be that you think tells the story of who you are. So you can get a very professional looking, visual accompaniment to your music, and you can do it in 10 minutes. It's like,
I see what you mean. So you've like, even if you're out in the country or something, you could say even if the person's singing to camera or not even that, walking through a field.
Yeah.
And then you just cut that with all the other field and outdoor kind of bits and with your music.
Or maybe it's like, a bit of space and, technology and, audio equipment and live gigs, you couldn't film an audience at a big festival, because how would you, you I mean, you could if you went to one, but do you know what I mean? Like you, but all that is available on Rotor, so you just put that in amongst it, right? And depends on what the song's about.
No, that's interesting. I mean, even just some, like you said, just standing there looking at the camera, or even looking away from the camera of the artist, and then interspersed with stuff. Yes, that is a great tip.
Rotorvideos.com. Or head to www.abcmusic.co.
Yes.
Click the Rotor logo on the homepage to access a 10% off discount for the service, but I believe also the label machine.
I think I do have one as well,
You
/Rotor, thelabelmachine.com/Rotor.
Yeah.
I think let's just look at time. I think we've got to wrap that.
I think we've
There's so many things. We're going to have to do another one of these next year.
Sure.
Amazing, Alex. Thank you so much.
No, man. Of course, thank you for having me on.
Super insightful. And to go and check out your podcast to hear more, especially all these great stories. And he knows all these, basically the people who are running the industry these days. He interviews them, and it's incredibly insightful. So you want to go to ABC Music Talk Podcast, subscribe, and likewise subscribe to the Label Machines podcast. And if you like it, do the rate it 5-star and give it a nice little positive review. Thanks again, Alex.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.